Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to our touch and go training in the Synaptic Airbus A220 in Flight Simulator 2024. Now we are going to go over everything in this video, starting from the setup of the aircraft, over the actual traffic patterns and what you have to take into consideration over here. We are going to base this on what real-world pilots would have to do when they have not had any jet airplane type rating yet and are doing their first rating on a passenger aircraft, which is 6 landings using both licensed flap settings for the landings. So let's go ahead and get right into this one, and we are going to start by simply loading up the airplane on the runway. This is default panel state, just loaded on Geneva's runway 22 over here, and we are just about getting ready for our flight. Now we are going to start down in the EFB, and down here we will go on to the load sheet, and personally I would take a minimum of 4,000 kilos of fuel here, and just so that the airplane feels a little bit more accurate, I'm also going to load 140 passengers and 1,000 kilos of cargo. Let's hit load aircraft so that we've got all of that on board. Next up, we are gonna go right down into the FMS and start setting that up. Obviously, we do not have a flight plan over here, so we'll have to program everything manually. So let's start by going to the flight plan page, and then our origin is Lima Sierra Golf Golf. Our destination is also Lima Sierra Golf Golf, and the cruising altitude is going to be 1,500 feet above the field elevation. Now, field elevation over here is 1400, the QNH is currently 1014, like this. So we are going to cruise at an altitude of 2,900 feet. I'm going to talk about why those 1500 above the field elevation is so important later on. Next up, let's select departure, and for that we only need the runway, nothing else, and then we can hit done, and then we can select an arrival. For that, I am going to tune the ILS approach runway 22 over here. You do not need to tune an ILS, but do get a runway in there, just so that the FMS has some reference data. Now we can enter an alternate, so if we need to divert, we're gonna go to Lyon, which is nearby, and we're gonna do that in 10,000 feet, just so that we got something down in the box. Let's execute that, move on to the fuel page. Now for this one, we've got zero fuel weight of 49,349 with a CG at 27.8. So there's 49,349 and 27.8. Block fuel 4,000 kilos, which is what we had entered, and we got 140 passengers on board. Now let's go ahead and execute that and move on to the performance page. This is where our setup is going to deviate from the standard setup for the first time, and that we're not only going to fill out the takeoff page, but also going to fill out the landing page already. So, starting with the takeoff though, we got a takeoff 2 and flaps 2. So let's select takeoff 2 and climb 2, APR armed, flaps 2 takeoff, bleed source on engines. Noise abatement profile is NADP number 1, so that's going to be 1000, 1000. And then we need our takeoff speeds, which are going to be 242935. So that's 124, 1... what did I say? Totally forgot it already. 29 and 135. Okay, so 129 and 135. Alright, now that we got this, let's move over to the approach page and start filling that stuff out as well. We're gonna start with the flaps 4 landing. We are going to use 5 knots VREF edition, but do not click set V speeds, because we need our takeoff speeds in here first. Finally, we can have a very quick look at the route, but that is really just to ensure that the landing runway is in here, which is all we're gonna need. And then we are gonna go to the fix page, and we are going to program the runway centerline in here. And if runway 22 is not in the database, then we are gonna try that again. So then we're just going to use Lima Sierra. What is it doing now? Alright, then we're just going to do Lima Sierra Golf Golf, airport reference point, and I'm going to use the runway track here, 223, into this direction, done, and then I'm also going to enter the same thing into the other direction. So again, Lima Sierra Golf Golf, and radio 043. That way, we now have the center line down here on our nav display, which is going to be pretty useful later on. And that's pretty much our setup complete. So with that, we have entered everything in the FMS. Let's just activate the terrain overlay and the traffic overlay. The same on your side over here. We got terrain and traffic. And then we can set up our... well, is it called FCU in here? Not 100% sure, to be honest. So 2,900 feet, then we'll take heading mode and VNAV mode, and that's of course all with takeoff mode armed and auto throttle armed. Finally, we gotta extend the flaps, because for some reason the airplane loads with flaps 2. We gotta set our trim, which is 3.4 units. Can get that from down here. And with that, we are basically done with our setup. Lastly, I will deselect the nav source and I'll just go straight onto the localizer down here so that we have no weird indications down there. Then we can acknowledge those messages and that's it. Now, with that we've basically completed our setup. So before we take the plane into the air, let's take a moment to talk about exactly what we are going to do now. So we are going to fly traffic patterns. Now, a standard traffic pattern in a jet airliner is usually flown in 1,500 feet AGL. The reason for that is that on the downwind, we will need 3 seconds downwind per 100 feet above the field elevation. So if we go to 1,500 AGL, we are going to fly a 45-second downwind minus the tailwind component, and that is going to give us a very nice, stabilized final approach, where we reach the center line at about 1,000 feet above ground. So basically, we are joining the final approach at the stabilized approach gate. That's the reason why we are choosing 1,500 for the patterns. Now, let's take a moment to talk about how we are going to fly those traffic patterns. So, first of all, the touch and goes. Touch and go landing procedures are intended for use during flight training, primarily for approach and landing practice, and should not be done as part of the normal takeoff and landing procedures. For a touch and go landing, flaps 5 is recommended, however, flaps 4 can also be used, and we are going to do both in today's video. During touch and go procedures, the flap retraction FMS F speeds are not shown in accordance to a normal takeoff and climb profile, and if the flap retraction is required during a touch and go procedure, we will do that. The recommended flap retraction speeds should be used as follows: flaps 4 to 3 at 170, flaps 3 to 2 at 180, flaps 2 to 1 at 190, and flaps 1 to 0 at 200. After the touch and go landing is complete, selection of a new approach in the FMS resets the FMS F speeds, and the appropriate flap extension speeds are shown again. Now, let's just talk about the touch and go procedure, and thereafter we are going to take our airplane into the air. So note, the ground lift dampers are automatically deployed when the weight on wheels sensor triggers, and retract when the thrust levers are advanced beyond a 23-degree thrust lever angle, which is approximately vertical. If the thrust levers are inadvertently deployed, a full stop landing must be completed, and if you use VREF for the rotation speed and VGO-around for the initial climb out, that's going to work pretty well. The flaps must be retracted one setting, so for example from flaps 5 to flaps 4 to reset the FMS logic from landing into takeoff, and very important, do not select toga. Now, contrary to our normal landing, there are a couple of special procedures we're going to do here, which is before landing, make sure that auto throttle is off, flight directors are off, and the flight control synoptic page is selected. We will use that later on. Once the airplane has touched down and all landing gears are on the ground, we are going to retract the flaps one step, adjust the trim to be right in the middle of the green band, then advance the thrust levers until the ground lift dampers are retracted, confirm that on the flight control synaptic page and that the flaps are set, and then advance the thrust levers manually to takeoff thrust, monitor the flight and engine instruments, at VREF, rotate towards 10 degrees pitch at a rate between 3 to 5 degrees per second, 3 degrees for the 300, up to 5 for the 100, and when a positive rate of climb is indicated, landing gear up, select heading mode and flight level change mode. And there's actually a caution in the procedure there. Engagement of the auto throttle without selecting heading and flight level change can cause the auto throttle to go into retard mode. So basically, close your thrust. Don't want that. For that reason, make sure to select heading and level change after the touch and go. Finally, flaps, autopilot and auto throttle as required. And once again, if reverse thrust has been initiated, a full stop must be made. Alright, so that's the procedure. Now let's go ahead and start flying for a little bit. Our initial departure is going to take us straight out, and we are going to fly straight ahead for a little bit, retracting the flaps, and once we are in clean speed, we're going to turn the flight directors off, make a 180-degree turn into the downwind, and then start with our traffic patterns and our touch-and-go training. So, are you ready to go? Then, take off. Park and brake is released. Let's go. So, the auto throttle is armed. We are going to start with a right-hand traffic pattern here, because we got the rain showers on the left side. $80 knots, thrust set. V1, rotate. Positive climb, gear up. That's 1,000 to go. Okay, flight directors off, auto thrust off. And then we're at 1,000 AGL. Let's pitch down and start the acceleration here. And then retract the flaps when going through the F1 speed. So that's going to be flaps 1. And then we can go on a manual speed here, 210 knots. Alright, through the F0 speed, retract the flaps to 0. And then we'll level off in 2,900. And just get a feeling for the airplane first. Remember, this procedure is mainly done for pilot training, so obviously we are going to treat it that way as well. Okay, so let's go into a right-hand downwind. Let's start reducing that speed back towards 210. And then we will establish ourselves in that downwind, and once we're in the downwind, we are going to sequence our FMS, make sure that the landing speeds are selected, and then we can take a moment to talk about how we are going to fly the approach. I do recommend to use a nav display range of 5 miles over here, because that enables you to easily put the 2.5 mile ring over here onto the runway center line, and that is basically the position you want to have for your downwind. So 2.5 miles is an excellent downwind because it does enable a short base turn and all that lovely stuff. Okay, so we're about to go wings level. On the downwind track, 2.5 miles off the center line. Track is 243. And here we go, nicely level. Now, let's just bring up the FMS here for a moment. We're gonna go on a route, legs, direct, runway 22, and we are going to select a course of 223 so that we get an extended centerline. Done, execute. And when we look at the map now, we basically got an extended runway centerline available down there. And let's start slowing down. Oh, flaps 1. And down here on the arrival, set V speeds. We're looking for flaps 2 on the downwind, so let's just slowly start slowing down, reset our chrono, and once we're at the beam position, so basically once we are next to the runway end, we are going to start the timing, and we will be looking for 45 seconds. Alright, and flaps 2. Let's do about 170 knots on the downwind here. That should work pretty well. Alright, we are abeam now. So start the timer, 45 seconds. And if you program an ILS approach initially, then you will get glide slope guidance, which is fairly useful for when you want to practice your altitude management initially. Again, in the real world, don't have to use that. In fact, it is mostly not used, but it's pretty nice to have if you need it. Okay, so 30 seconds, and approach speed is going to be 138. Let's just dial that down. Here we go, 138, and we're approaching 45 seconds. And let's start the right-hand turn. Alright, gear down, flaps 3. We can start to initiate a very shallow descent over here, but just a couple hundred feet a minute, not more than that. And then let's fly ourselves onto that final. So, we do have the glide slope from the ILS available down there, pretty useful. And flaps 4. That's going to be our final setting. So, let's have a look. There's our runway, we're on the poppy, 3 reds. So let's fly ourselves onto that final. Now, we do need the flight control synoptic page. So just select that over here. And let's just review our touch and go procedure. So we are going to touch down, bring all the wheels onto the ground. When all wheels are on the ground, that includes the nose wheel, we are going to retract the flaps 1 notch, set the trim to the middle of the green band, and once that is done, advance the thrust levers and ensure that the ground spoilers are retracting. When the ground spoilers are retracted, set takeoff thrust, rotate basically at 138, and then we can climb out just above those 138. Alright, so gears down, flaps are down, that's it. Now just a small warning here, I am using a pre-release version of the aircraft for this touch and go, and there is a little bug in there that after the liftoff we are going to get a ground proximity warning. That's just a bug in the pre-release version, that's obviously not supposed to happen in the real aircraft. Alright, so to review the landing, we are going to flare at 30 feet, just pitch up ever so slightly, flare the airplane, but do fly it into the ground. Do not hold it off. That's not how you land a jet. You fly those things into the ground. Okay, so this is looking quite good. Do not shy away from the runway, keep descending. Alright, 30 feet, flare. Do not hold it off, fly it down, and touch down. Okay, retract the flaps 1 notch. Now on the synoptic page you can see the lift dumpers out. Let's also trim at the same time. So we're trimming to the middle of the green band, roughly here. Then we'll put the thrust levers to the middle, and you can see that the ground spoilers are retracting. Alright. Engines are running up symmetrically. Then let's set takeoff thrust. We gotta set that manually. No auto throttle for that. Alright, V1 rotate. 10 degrees pitch, positive climb, gear up. Yeah, shut up. Okay. So, and now we are nicely pitching for speed. And once we're at 1000 AGL, we can start the acceleration again. And then we come back and do the same thing again. This time we are going to fly left-hand pattern. So here's 2400, 1000 AGL. Let's start the acceleration, and as mentioned, we do not have F-speeds to retract the flaps now. So what we are going to do is go heading, level change. Alright, already close enough to 2900. So flaps 3 to 2 at 180 knots. So we'll level off over here. And we're passing 180, flaps 2. And then at 190 we can retract the flaps into config 1. Let's also start the left-hand turn here. So 190, flaps 1. And at 200 we retract the flaps to 0. And flaps 0. Then let's reduce our speed here. 210. This is where a pilot monitoring would have been nice. So flight directors off. Speeds 210. And here we go. Now let's make sure we maintain that altitude. Let's make sure we get the airplane right back on speed. And when all of that is done, then we are going to prepare for the next landing. So let's reset the timer in preparation for the next approach. Let's get the FMS, flight plan, arrivals, Geneva ILS-22. I'm just going to click on it again. Done. Execute. Route. Direct. Runway 22. Course to the runway track 223. Done. Execute. Performance. Arrival. Set V speeds. We are going to do another flaps 4 landing. And with that, we have done that setup. So back to the map. We're going to fly us into a nice 2.5 mile downwind. Let's start slowing down. We did get a little bit high here, so let's just correct for that. I would absolutely love to fly over Geneva this low in the real world, but yeah, you can always dream. Okay, so let's try to enter the pattern at about 180 knots so that we're not too fast here. Reaching 2900 now. That way we can nicely start slowing down. Alright, we do have our green dot over here, so flaps 1. Speed checked. We can go down to about 180. And we're going to do that in flaps 2. And make sure that we got those 2.5 mile downwind. So here's flaps 2. Okay, the 2.5 mile ring is right on the runway, so we're exactly spot on. And we're reaching the target speed. Okay. So let's look out. There's our landing runway threshold, and as soon as we're at the beam position, we are going to start the timer. By the way, this looks fantastic, doesn't it? Okay, and that's basically the beam position right over here. So, start the timing. Okay, and then we are going to do that same thing again. Now, let's see. FMS, performance, final approach speed 133 plus 5. So, 138. Let's already set that while we have the time. Okay, we did start the timer a little late. Let's start the base turn. Alright, gear down, flaps 3. If you do not want to use the timer to time your base turn, and if you do want to use the ILS, it's basically when the glide slope starts to come in. That's a good moment to start turning final. Alright, flaps 4. So very easy to fly once you get the hang of it. Okay, let's roll out of that turn. Here we go. Looking fantastic. There's our runway. We're on the poppy. Beautiful. So, if you are flying a ground speed of 150 knots like we are right now, then you basically have to start the final turn when you're about ground speed divided by 2, so at around 0.8 nautical miles from the center line with a 25-degree angular bank. That's gonna get you nicely aligned with the center line. You can start it a little earlier with less bank. That gives you options to avoid an overshoot. And like that, we are now nicely established on the final once again. We do have our poppy in front of us. Whether you want to use the ILS or the poppy is up to you. In the real world, you would fly this without ILS, and you would exclusively use visual cues, because these are visual traffic patterns at the end of the day. But fully up to you how you want to familiarize yourself with the aircraft. But I can really recommend to start doing it with a look out of the window, because it just gives you a little different feeling for the aircraft again. Now, since we are required by law to make 6 landings here, we can of course just do the first 1 or 2 with the ILS to get a hang of the way that the aircraft handles, and then you can always just go over to doing it visually for the last couple of landings. Alright, correcting speeds. Now that is looking better. Okay, remember the procedure. Retract flaps 1 notch, stand up the thrust levers once the trim is set. Okay, and here we are. So, flare, touchdown, and that's it. So, all wheels on the ground. Flaps 3, setting the trim into the middle of the green band. Stand up thrust levers, and you can observe the spoilers retracting over here. Okay. Set takeoff thrust. Thrust set. V1 rotate. Disregard the GPWS, that's a bug in the preview version I'm using. Positive climb, gear up. Okay. So we're airborne, we're climbing. We're at a safe altitude. Heading, level change, auto thrust. That way we do get automatic climb thrust. And then let's do another left-hand traffic pattern, and this time we are going to do a flaps full landing. And we are going to stay at 180 knots in the pattern. That way, flight director's off. We can already start the turn, and that is going to shorten the patterns a little bit. So once you get the hang of the way that the airplane feels, you can just go over and basically start the base turn at 400 AGL. It's just that you should feel confident enough that you can do the FMS entries. Okay, flaps 2, and then we're gonna maintain 180. So manual thrust. Okay. So remember, for the FMS, flight plan, arrivals, reselect that landing. Let's actually go ahead and select the on-off approach this time. So that's selected. Route page, direct to, landing runway, and inbound course onto the runway heading. Like this. Done. Execute. Performance. Arrivals. And look at that, we lost the V-speeds. Yeah, I got no idea why we lost them. It still has the speed info. Still has the takeoff speeds. Well, it was 133 before, it will be 133 now. Alright, and let's give it flaps 5 this time. Okay, so we're about to approach the downwind position. Now let's deselect the nav source over here, because we are going to fly this one completely visually. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't have the speeds any longer. Doesn't matter though. We can do this completely selected. Okay. So, we're passing the beam position now. Starting the timer, 45 seconds. And our final approach speed is going to be 138. Let me set that already. Like this. And this time we are going to do a flaps 5 landing. Probably a couple of knots less then. Let's do 133. So you can see that this time I have deselected the ILS on the nav source, so that we're actually forced to fly this the good old-fashioned way by looking out of the window. Alright, it's 5 seconds until we turn into the downwind. Go. So, gear down, flaps 3. And very shallow descent, couple 100 feet a minute, no more than that. Alright, flaps 4. Probably descending a bit too quick right now. Okay, downward track. Wings level. Let's have a look. So there we are, showing 3 reds on the puppies. And remember what I said earlier, ground speed divided by 2 equals the distance from the centerline to turn final. The ring is 2.5, so when we're about 2/3 into the ring, we can start the final turn, and that should give us a nice final turn. So about now. So, flaps full. Okay, where is the runway? There it is. Of course we overshot. Which is interesting. According to the nav display we are right on. So our center line is probably not exactly on center. Okay, doesn't matter. We'll re-establish ourselves. We're on the puppy. We're on the descent. Flaps 5 this time, so it's going to be flaps 4 for the takeoff. And that's all there is to it. So with flaps 5 the airplane is going to flare a little bit less, it's going to lose a little bit more speed. Therefore we got to be a little more careful when doing that touch and go. Really entered a little downdraft here. So there's the puppy. Let's get it back on speed. And by the 500 foot gate everything needs to be stabilized, so the 500 foot gate is 1900. Here we are, looking good, going through 1900. You can just put the bird on your PFD onto the 3 degrees, and when the bird is on 3 degrees and the puppy shows that you're on 2 whites, 2 reds, then the approach has to basically be successful. Getting a little fast now, correcting. Okay, this looks good. Okay, idle, flare. And here we are. Retract the flaps 1 notch. Start trimming. Middle of the green band. Stand up the thrust levers. Lift dampers are retracting. Now I'm just going to do something out of the procedure here. I will just deselect the flap and gear warnings just to see if that helps with my pre-release version. Okay, set takeoff thrust. V1, rotate. Positive climb. Gear up. Beautiful. Alright. Heading, level change, auto thrust. And then we're gonna do another left-hand traffic pattern. Or rather another right-hand traffic pattern. Another flaps 5 landing. Alright, here's 1000 AGL. Let's turn everything off. Okay, we can start that acceleration. Going for 180 knots once again. So, flaps 3. Flaps 2. And here we are, sticking to those 180. Good. So, one last time. FMS, F-plan, arrival. Let's just go for the ILS 22 once again. Done. And execute. Then, performance, arrival. Look at that, suddenly we also have speeds again. Let's go ahead and delete those manually entered speeds. Thank you. Alright, and takeoff speeds are in here. Complete. Route. Direct 2. Runway 22. 223. No, that's wrong. 223. Alright. Done. Execute. That's it. Cool. So, we want to make sure that we got those 2.5 miles from the center line. Otherwise, that is not gonna work out with the downwind. So let's just regain those now. Keep the speed where it is. Alright, we are... well, down here we can see that we're basically in the beam position now. So let's start the timer. And by the time we turn base, we want to have those 2.5 miles. So that's why I'm just opening the downwind a little bit right now. Let's also aim to get back down to those 2,900. Again, I'm not selecting the ILS actively. I'm just keeping it exactly as it is. We also don't need a minimum since we are completely visual for the procedure. Alright, now we're reaching the 2.5 mile downwind. So let's bring ourselves back onto that downwind course, which is 043. Okay, and we're approaching 45 seconds. So let's start the base turn. Here we are, 45. Alright, gear down, flaps 3. And I'm going to turn this one into a full stop landing here, because I've basically shown you everything there is to it. You could watch me fly those other 2 patterns, but there wouldn't be anything new involved there. So I'm gonna spare you that stuff. But I think you've basically learned it now, how to fly those traffic patterns. Just go ahead, fly some, see how your airplane handling improves. You can really feel the manual flying skills become better. You can really feel the entire airplane become much more easy for you to handle while you do this. Okay, flaps 4. And let's start the final turn, flaps 4. Okay, here we go. We are a little bit low right now, but getting right back into it. Remember, the stabilized approach gate for a procedure like this is 500 feet. Because by the very nature of the procedure, you have to be visual at all times. So you are in VMC, 500 foot gate applies. That's basically how easy it is. Okay, and here we go. We're on the poppy. So, put the bird on your PFD onto the 3 degrees. And with that, we're nicely established on the descent here. So everything's set up. This time it's going to be a full stop landing. And that means we can select some auto brakes, and we are also going to select the reversers this time. And believe me, after you've done a couple of landings, or rather after you've done a couple of touch and goes, it really does take some conscious thinking to get that reverser engaged, because you've been so used to not selecting it. Especially after doing an entire type rating where you learn that you always select it, then they tell you all of a sudden, yeah, you can't do it now. So that's always something to think about. Alright, as a last general note on landing the airplane here, try to keep the pitch as stable as possible. If you're constantly pitching up and down, that's really making approaches harder, quite unnecessarily. Right. Okay, so idle, flare, touchdown, nice. Alright, spoilers, reverse green. Decel. $70 knots. Okay, and that's our touch and goes. In the real world you would have to do another 2 until you are fully certified to carry passengers. In the simulator, as mentioned earlier, you would just see me do the same stuff over and over again. But this is really something worth doing, something that really gets your flying skills up, because you have to do a lot of panel scanning, you have to do a lot of maneuvering close to the ground, and a lot of takeoffs and landings. So that really gets you up to speed with the handling qualities of the airplane. Well guys, and that's gonna be it for today's video. I hope you liked it. Leave your feedback in the comments underneath. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm really looking forward to see you all again on the next one.